Okay, welcome to College, the podcast. I am your co-host, Matt Carpenter. I'll be joined today with my other co-host, Peg Keough, the fairy godmother of financial aid. Today, we're continuing our theme with Financial Aid Application Month. The CSS Profile is the focus today. So we're going to talk about what is the CSS Profile? How do we get through this beast? What are the mechanics of actually setting up, completing, and submitting this form? Who submits it? What if I'm divorced or separated? How is that different than the FAFSA? What happens after I submit it? We have to go through something called this verification process, and then we'll talk about deadlines and finally kind of sprinkle in why should we even bother, regardless of who we are. Thanks for joining in. Hi, Peggy.
Hey, how are you?
Good. We have alternate locations for both of us today, right?
Where are you?
I'm in a place that may not be named, so I can't comment on that, Peggy. I cannot comment. I know where you are.
You don't work for the CIA. I don't really understand the secrecy.
You think you know me. You think you know me. And you're down there in Chapel Hill with Mom.
Yep. Go Tar Heels. They need a little help. We won't even talk about their coach. Your past, buddy. But
Chapel
anyways.
Bill. We call it Chapel Bill now.
Nope. I don't think they're calling it that here. They're already bitching about him. So
They better get some results quick, or else the fanfare will die down.
yes.
All right, beautiful. Look at in terms of the task at hand, we are still very much in the thick of our kind of financial aid application month. If you did not listen to the last 2 episodes and this stuff is important to you, I think it's worth your while because we got relatively in the weeds on the FAFSA, which is kind of like the foundational, the main financial aid application. So again, if you didn't listen to those, I think it's worth your time if you're again, if it's relevant to you. Now we're here to talk about.
Well, it's relevant to everybody because we want everybody to fill out the FAFSA.
Well said. Well said. Now we're here to talk about, I would say, a less of a household name when it comes to financial aid, just less of a buzzword. But if you're applying to some of the colleges that require this form called the CSS Profile, it's really more important. It's actually more important than the FAFSA. Now you have to do both, to be clear. You have to do both. And do you want to say our favorite kind of in-house quote that we like to say here, Peggy?
Yeah. A colleague of ours, Billy Rabbit, he says when you're doing the FAFSA, you pick your drink of choice if you're 21 or over. So if it's beer, if it's wine, if it's espresso martini like myself, you have that ready and you enjoy it as you're doing the FAFSA. With the CSS Profile, you need to get a 6 of beer, the whole bottle of wine, and several cocktails if you're me. So we always joke about this form is kind of the real deal. It's much longer, much more invasive. There are strategies to fill it out effectively, just like the FAFSA, but it's just you can't make it short and easy like the FAFSA. It just is what it is. And as you said, it's a necessary evil because the schools that require it, if you don't submit it, they will not look at you to give anything but federal and state aid. And the lion's share of students get most of their discounts from the colleges, not from the federal government and not from their state. Is just the bottom line. So you really do have to do it or you're literally could be leaving tens of thousands. It could total 6 figures over 4 years what you're leaving behind for some families. It sounds dramatic, but it's actually accurate for some families, for sure.
No question, right? No question. And again, the reason why we say, hey, you're probably going to want to get out the bottle of JMO when you do the CSS Profile. I think when we've all heard these horror stories, we've heard other parents talking to one another and school counselors like, oh my God, applying for financial aid is such a beast. It's a bear. I'd rather go through 5 audits than, have to apply for financial aid again, right? We've kind of heard it all. And yes, I think some people struggle with the FAFSA, and yes, just those types of applications are just a huge challenge for some people. But when I hear people really kind of wailing on the financial aid application process itself, I go, they're talking about the CSS Profile, right? This is the one form where I'm like, yes, hundreds of questions, nuanced questions where I'm like, why are they even asking me that? Why is that their business, right? It's invasive, right? I mean, some of it, I think a lot of
Mhm.
people feel like this is like icky. I don't want to, whose business is this?
Yep,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, and in addition to just being just a very laborious form. So I think that does a decent explanation of explaining what the CSS profile is, right? A financial aid application that's required in addition to the FAFSA, does not replace the FAFSA, in addition to the FAFSA, at several hundred colleges. And they tend to be, just to give you an idea, they tend to be the schools that are, when we think of like really academically competitive schools, right? So all the Ivy League schools, Princeton has their own form, so they're the one outlier. But all those types of, our Amherst, our Williams, and our Stanfords, and our MITs, and our U Chicagos, right? All of these types of colleges require this form. The most popular are the public Ivies, right? UNC Chapel Hill being one of them, right? UNC Chapel Bill, Michigan, UVA, right? And again, this is of course is not an extensive list, but again, when we talk about what types of colleges are requiring this form, hopefully that gives you a general sense. But Peggy, talk a little bit about like how do you submit it? Is it like the FAFSA in terms of getting an FSA ID? Just talk about the mechanics a little bit.
Yeah, the mechanics are a little bit easier if you're married. It's your child, most likely College Board, that you probably heard of if your child's taken the PSAT, SAT, AP classes. This is this nonprofit called College Board. They also administer the CSS profile. So most kids, by the time they're juniors, let alone seniors, have a login to College Board. So basically, if you're married, you're going to go in there with your child and you're just using their login. It's an email and their password. So there's no extra work like there is with the FAFSA. If you're divorced or separated, it's a little bit more complicated because if you remember, if you listen to our previous episodes on the FAFSA, if you're divorced, only that one parent, the custodial parent, the parent that provides the most financial support on a year look back from when you're submitting the form, that's the parent that submits it with the student. Same thing with the CSS profile. That custodial parent, it needs to be the same one each year. It has to match the FAFSA, submits it. But if you're divorced, the other biological parent, the non-custodial parent, also submits the CSS profile. They're submitting what we call, and what everybody calls, the non-custodial profile. And that gets a little complicated because that parent has to set up their College Board account because the custodial parent is using the student's College Board account. So that gets a little confusing as far as barrier to entry, but they're both submitting this form. It's super important that they both do it because otherwise that college will look at it and say, you don't have a complete financial aid. You haven't gotten everything in that we want. So we're not going to look at you to give out our money, like which I said before, is where all the money basically comes from. So it's really, really important for families that are divorced to realize that. And sometimes it gets a little tricky. One parent's like, I don't want to submit it because I don't want to pay. This in no way obligates parents to pay either form. It just gives the student the opportunity to get need-based aid. No parent is going to be on the hook for any money. So it's really sad. And I know you've had this too, Matt, where a parent just won't do it. And I'm like, okay, then you're writing a full check. And it's super sad if the family could get need-based aid and they're leaving the money on the table. So that sometimes is something we help families navigate and try and help parents do it. But a key thing to realize is it's completely private. People don't have to worry if they've been divorced for years, they don't know what each other makes and all that stuff. It's not going to be shared. College Board will get it from each parent and it isn't commingled or shared in any way. So that's
Yeah,
something that relieves people.
and exactly, and to double down on that point, that's some of the big, I would say maybe the number one reason why parent divorce or split households that are maybe are not amicable, right? Or like, well, I'm not doing that. I don't want to take the risk of my ex-spouse seeing my information, and don't take our word for it. Talk to College Board, ask them about their policies, ask them about their kind of security around that. I've never had an issue in doing this for 20 years for families. I have never seen that kind of Chinese firewall be broken, right? I've never heard once of somehow the other parent seeing the other parent's information. So, obviously that's anecdotal. talk to them, talk to the colleges, right? The colleges are used to getting those questions too. And I think they'll put you at ease. They take it very, very seriously. And again, we never see issues with that particular concern, which is totally relevant. The other, I think, very relatively common thing that we get here is that, okay, this college is telling me that my ex-spouse is required to complete this application in order for my student to be considered for need-based financial aid, but that's not possible. They're out of the country. We don't know where they are. They're dangerous, right? We have a restraining order there. Any number of things where it is just not possible to get the other parent to comply and complete their part of the CSS profile. You need to contact each individual college that requires that form and explain that to them. But when you do, they're going to say you're going to have to complete something called the non-custodial waiver. Now, I would say this is a little bit of an unpleasant process because they're really going to ask you to kind of air your dirty laundry, right? You have to put in writing, here's why the other biological parent cannot, will not, whatever it happens to be, complete the CSS profile. They want something usually, right? Typically, again, school by school, and you got to know how your schools operate. They want something in writing from the parent. They want something in writing from the student. And oftentimes they want a third party, right? They want a school counselor. They'll suggest a clergy member or a rabbi, something like this that can kind of attest to what you're sharing. So it's not a pleasant experience, right? A lot of people are like, well, I have to talk about all the stuff that was like really traumatic, right? That got us to this point. I don't want my kid to have to do that. I don't want to do that. And it's just kind of a harsh reality. I can't share something that's going to make you feel good about that. Like we all wish it was just like, guys, it's not possible for that person to do it. They won't do it. And that was it. Unfortunately, that's not the reality. Now, to me, the silver lining I anchor to is if you go through this kind of painful exercise, you will qualify for the waiver, right? And you will get need-based financial aid, and your student will not be punished for kind of the behavior of their other parent.
Yeah, and depending on the waiver circumstances, it's not something you have to go through every year typically. That they realize that they're not your enemy. Yeah, I've had a couple heartbreaking ones in the last couple years where it's like literally bringing up the trauma again and the therapist has to be there. And so you have to gauge as a family how to handle that. But to Matt's point, however you can handle it so it's not super detrimental to your child, it's kind of a must if you can do it. If it's, you got to gauge. But otherwise, if you don't do it and you've got major grounds to do it, they're going to say, sorry, your financial aid forms are not complete. And then what that's going to be. It's just going to be federal aid and, if applicable, state aid. So,
Yeah.
but not a lot, but both of us have had it many, many times. And it's just really the student usually shares just why they can't be in touch with their mom or dad, whatever that happens to be. And hopefully they can get through it. And then the college says, all right, we hear you. Now it'll just be the custodial parent and the student. And then they move forward with packaging and stuff.
And I will just say, just be kind of, again, mentally prepared. Obviously, every college is different, and the individuals at the colleges that are, reading these non-custodial waivers. But I've had some unpleasant experiences where colleges have just denied it or been even more, wanted even more details, right? And again, I don't want to overgeneralize too much here, but I think certain colleges and certain individuals almost have the baseline mentality of like, families are trying to pull a fast one on us. So I'm going to start from that place and make them prove that I'm wrong, right? As opposed to just like, hey, I can probably take people at face value, and so long as they complete the formalities, right, we're gonna handle it accordingly. So again, I take some time to prepare families that are going through this process to just expect some unpleasantness there, right?
Well, yeah, and that's why having the third party, like a therapist or, like you said, a clergyman or somebody else who can speak to it, not I heard blah, 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 but somebody who can speak to it. That's just when I work with families, I immediately say, who can speak to this? Who's a third party? Because that just immediately usually gets rid of the objection. Unfortunately, there are some people out there in all walks of life that are always trying to pull fast ones. And the colleges just have to be careful that it's not just, non-custodial parent who's loaded just doesn't feel like doing this and, doesn't care. That's not good enough, unfortunately. So just be prepared and try and find a third party, and then you won't be rejected and then have to go find one. And the more yeah, just like everything with appeals, the more documentation that you have, and you do kind of have to spill. You do have to share. And not that it has to be super drama, but if it were me, I would share the honest truth. That's what they need to know to realize, oh, yeah, this is really not good for the student. So we will approve the waiver. So.
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, so Peggy, talk just a little bit about like, okay, so what's on this form? What can I expect to have to answer, talk about, etc.?
Yeah, so similar to the FAFSA, it's going to ask all about assets and income for the parents and the student, right? Same thing. It does go deeper, and it includes all the real estate you have, including the primary home you live in. As we just talked about, it includes both parents, which is different than the FAFSA, but it's just much more detailed. And they're going to ask about your expected earnings in 2025 and 2026. It asks a lot more stuff than the FAFSA. The key thing to keep in mind with the CSS profile, and you're going to notice it, a lot of the questions they don't say required, which means they're not required. So at CAP, one of not across the board, we like to talk to people one-on-one as far as strategizing, but typically a lot of those questions you don't need to answer. And it's not you're trying to be dishonest. If it's not required, they're making it not required. Also, something that's very different from the FAFSA, once you submit this form, either there's an entity called IDOC, so IDOC. So if you get that, it's not phishing, it's legit, and that's another thing that College Board does. Or it could be the college or university directly is going to say, okay, thank you for the CSS. Now send us your tax and your W-2s and your corporate returns, and basically send us all of your confidential financial information. So my point is, you're not filling in your interest and dividends to lie. They're going to see it because they're going to ask for your tax return. So you know what? Why take the time to do it and maybe put a wrong number there? They want all your personal information so they can see all that. That's part of it.
Yeah. So, and again, we've talked about this before, talk about it consistently. Just another reason why whatever you put on these financial aid applications, it has to be, the story has to make sense with what shows up on your tax returns, because in just about all cases, colleges are going to be seeing these. So they're not just going to take you at face value, right? So that
they
kind
definitely.
it has to
Yeah,
make sense.
you don't want to be saying that you have $10,000 and then they look at your tax return and you have $40,000 of dividends and interest. Like, they're going to look at that and say, we think mom or mom and dad have this. And they're just going to many times put it into their equation and not even say anything, because they're not. I mean, I've never worked in a financial aid office, but I would assume some of these people are pretty savvy. They should be, if they're looking at all these tax returns year after year. So that's a big part of the reason they're doing it, is because they would have to take your word for it that on the FAFSA, your income moves in from the IRS. So they know it's been verified. But on the CSS, they can see your FAFSA, but they can't see everything. And the FAFSA doesn't ask a lot of things that the CSS does. So they're checking it and they're digging into your tax return as well, especially like if you're a business owner. They're looking at your tax return, and a big one that they love to qualify is depreciation. Like, if you have depreciation, you have rental properties, you don't pay depreciation. It's not like paying for a new water softener for a rental property. It's just a perk to lower your taxes. So it's not a tangible expense. So they love to say, well, we're going to throw that out. And then your income goes up, right? You no longer are flat. Now the depreciation's gone. Now you have income. It raises what you can pay for college. There's all these things going on. That's the stuff that we work with families and help them with, because we know what the colleges are doing. But just keep that in mind with the CSS, is that they're going to see all of your tax returns. And some parents are just like, what the hell? I remember with my two, Matt, there was no IDOC, right? You were literally faxing tax returns when I was doing it. And I remember doing it going, I hope to hell they have a shredder. Neither one of my kids even went to a CSS school, and they had all my stuff, right? And I didn't get any money anyways, but Yeah, it's a little scary with all the identity theft and you're sending tax returns,
Yeah, I remember mom's friend calling. Is that mom's friend on the line? Get her on.
No, sorry, that was my phone that I didn't put on
Alright.
vibrate, so
Come
that's
on,
my bad.
Peggy. But we have, yeah,
Thanks for
look at
calling it out, though, thank you.
oh, my
I
pleasure.
thought I was turning it off quickly.
I remember the fax days, I remember the snail mail days, and but you highlighted like kind of a PhD level point here that people are completely unaware of is these colleges are getting your tax returns. It's not just to verify. It's to make their own interpretations, right? You wrote off your depreciation, bullshit. You wrote off this amount in, travel expenses. I think that seems a little high to me, right? They're going to make their own interpretation. And usually, with that, the end result is your income actually ends up going up, right? And then that in turn means your SAI is going to go up. And of course, the end result being you're getting a little less or maybe a lot less need based financial aid based on their essentially changes to your tax return. We share that because obviously those things are very much appealable. One of the
Yep,
things we always challenge specifically for business owners is we want to say like, okay, let's talk about how you evaluated my business tax returns because something's not jiving here, right? It's usually
right.
pretty clear. So
And
again,
that's why it's super important, like you and I always preach, have good estimates of your student aid index slash family contribution slash expected family contribution, whatever they're calling it. Because if you don't have an estimate, you don't know if what you got is good. And just because you got 20,000 in grants doesn't mean that they didn't under reward you and it could be better. So that's why it's so important to have an idea of what the affordability is of that college, because otherwise you're just kind of a sitting duck when you get the financial aid package. You have no idea if it's good or bad or ugly, right?
and we know that just, because obviously in the college's defense, this is a very, every business is different. And, some of the tax write offs, maybe, okay, fair enough. The depreciation, maybe I kind of even get where they're like, that's bullshit, right? Like your W 2 earner doesn't get to write off depreciation, right? So I can sometimes almost get where they're coming from. But again, we want to make sure because we know as a practice, some colleges just, if you show negative income for your business, they just don't buy that, right? They just say, no, there's not a negative number here. And they'll just, as a practice, either have that be zero. I've even seen extremes where they just put a plus sign there. You're negative 200,000, you're plus 200,000. And I'll pick on that was the most glaring example that I've ever seen was UPenn specifically. And that was their answer. Like we just, it was a negative $250,000 loss. Now we think it's negative 200 or we're treating it as $250,000 in adjusted gross income, essentially. So, extreme example, one off, but I promise you, there's tons of examples when it comes to things like that. With the takeaway being, we want to know how the colleges interpreted our tax returns because usually that's a great place to appeal. Okay.
Yep.
So Peggy, let's last thing, just talk to us about timing, due dates, like how's just talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so this year it should be good. We're back to where both forms go live October 1, and then the colleges will have their deadlines. So they'll say if you're applying early decision or early action or regular admission, and I think we've had an episode on that. That's the way that your child applies for admission. There's corresponding deadlines. When we work with families, all the thousands of families we work with, we're going to get the forms in October. Like that we just get them in for everybody, and you're making all of the colleges deadlines. They have these priority financial aid deadlines. If you're eligible for state aid, you need to be careful because that goes off the FAFSA, and the FAFSA and the CSS should have the same deadlines this year because they're coming out at the same time, unlike the last 2 years. So, but if you're eligible for state income, I will say that it's important to get that FAFSA in sooner. You don't have to do it October 1st, but I would do it by the end of the first week. Just get in the queue for state aid. That doesn't mean the CSS has to be in exactly at the same time. Sometimes, when people are working with us, we just get them all done at the same time, but just get them done. But if you're not a person that wants to get them done in the month of October and the deadline's in December, plan on having it in like a week before because things can happen. You can lose your internet or this or that. Don't wait until the night before to get it in. Most colleges will have their deadline and all those forms come in and they do a download after the fact. They don't really care if you send it in October 2nd or if you send it in on Halloween if the deadline is November 2nd. They don't really care. It's just all in that bunch unless they're a first come, first served school, which just really isn't. I don't know your experience, Matt, but the media 10 years ago, every school, get it in, get it. And it just
Right.
wasn't even true then. So most schools have their deadlines, and the easiest thing is find the earliest deadline, get it in a decent amount before, and unless you're eligible for state aid, get that FAFSA in, by the end of the first week is what I always say, just so you're in the queue.
Yeah, I think by and large, one of the one of the myths around financial aid is it's first come, first serve. And again, by and large, just not the case. You just got to hit the priority deadlines. But again, every college is different. So, and they're not going to be proactive with you. This is not high school where they're going to be you're going to be constantly hearing from your school counselor and making sure that student and parent is staying online. A lot of these colleges will only communicate with the student, right? They're asking the student for tax returns and W-2s for their parents. So you got to be dialed. You got to be, again, proactive as this list of schools is coming to fruition. What's required? When is it due? We got to be perfect with our deadlines, be a little bit early. Do not give them excuses to give you less money, but don't put so much pressure on yourself like, oh my God, I got to get this thing in October 1st and I'm stressed out with the FAFSA crashing. Like, you're fine, but get the thing in the first half of October and we're done, right? Like
Yeah.
that's simple.
And look on the college websites for the information. Maybe I'm a little jaded, but just don't trust any third party sites because the college can always change their deadlines. And if you miss a deadline, it's really, really punitive. And the other thing I'll say, and I've probably said this before about the FAFSA, as a parent, I was never a helicopter parent, but when it comes to this stuff, don't just tell your kids to figure it out and then they screw up or they don't do it. And then because this is your money that you're spending, right? And you don't want to get tens of thousands of less dollars because you missed a deadline. It's not really a great time to let your kids screw up. That's a big screw up, right? So you want to be checking that and make sure you're all over it with your kids.
Yeah, 100%, right? Like, don't give these guys excuses to give you less money. It's that simple. When in doubt, reach out. Do you have everything, right? I think that's great practice too. Like, get everything submitted in the school, take the couple of minutes, and guys, do you have everything that you need? Again, making sure that we're just hedging, because at the end of the day, there's a lot at stake, and we don't want to do anything that's any self-inflicted wounds.
Yeah, you
Right?
want to put your best foot forward. And yeah, so it's next week. October 1
Sweet,
is
baby. Wow.
Thursday, right? Yeah,
What
next
a time
Thursday.
to be alive. Doesn't get any better. Doesn't
Gotta
get any better.
love it.
All right. Well, I think that was the big one, right? CSS Profile, guys. I think if there's one takeaway here, a couple beers for the FAFSA, beers and shots for the CSS Profile, and then we're all in business, right?
Yeah.
Try to bring some levity to this thing. Lean on us. We got a ton of resources around all this stuff. Our girl Peggy here with our line by line instructions. So we got you covered. But yeah, appreciate you listening. Please continue to do so. Share our stuff with anybody else that might benefit, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, have fun in your mystery location, Matt.
You'll never know. You'll never know. You too, Peggy.
All right.
Say hi
Bye,
to Mom.
everybody.
Bye. Okay, today's episode was co-hosted by myself, Matt Carpenter, and Peggy Keough. As always, it was edited and produced by our very own Eileen Campbell. If you like our podcast, please follow us. Please share us. Let anybody in your space that cares about this college deal know that we exist, and tune in next week.